Morning, everybody. Welcome to Ardor. Ardor is a raw black. That's what we're going to be exploring today. So, there's lots to talk about in relationship to Ardor. And I think we're going to focus on both a look back, but most of the time on the present, because I want to give you some framework to think about Ardor. But I also want to talk about what Hook High has done, which is different than other tea areas. So you just heard me use what sounds like a foreign word, Hook High, Hekaikai. And so that's a tea mountain, and that's where today's tea comes from. So for those of you who just got up and didn't check your email, I sent you one of those under the radar emails 30 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago. And if you'll open that, it shows a picture of several famous tea mountains. It's a map of where these tea mountains are. So if you look down on the purple circle, and in that purple circle, it has Hekai. That's where we are today, Hook High. And that's where Ardor comes from. And why did I choose to highlight this today? I chose to highlight it because this is a famous tea mountain, but to you, it's not famous at all. You've never heard of it, most likely. Most Americans, oh yeah, I got some real good stuff from Hook High. You know, they nod their head because they're friends with you, but they wouldn't nod their head because they have any idea at all where you're talking about. Well, now you know. So Hook High isn't all that far from the Burmese border. And in fact, we were staying in Xishuangbanna, which is just kind of a stone's throw from the Burmese border. It's the largest city close to the Burmese border on the Chinese side. And drove up to Munghai, which is a little bit north. And it's interesting because there's a certain area that you can get stopped, and they want to know what you're doing down there. And they particularly want to know what a face like mine is doing down there. And so we actually experienced that evening coming from Hook High. We're trying to get back to Xishuangbanna. We're pulled over at one of these stops, and then the driver, who's a person of the tea elite, is asked to get out, and we're sitting in there, and they've got our passports, and 6 minutes later, we're on our way off to go. So this is an area that the border police patrol very vigorously, especially the main roads, because they don't want smuggling, they don't want any of those bad things that can happen. And so this is part of the safety uh, measures that they put in place. And over the years, these measures have become more and more obvious. So let's talk about the look and feel of Hook High. So we go to Munghai and then we drive. We take a due east direction towards Hook High. And so you're driving. Let's think about where we are in terms of elevation. At that point, the elevation is about 2,000 feet above sea level. And so we're driving through flatlands, and it's all these fields of vegetables that are growing, and they're covered in these plastic tents, and fruits. And we drove by row after row after row of watermelon that was growing down there, and other vegetables. It's really interesting. And then all of a sudden you start ascending the mountain. So you go up about to 5 to 6,000 feet above sea level. So we're in a nice zone in terms of tea, and in terms of forests, and in terms of watershed, and it's completely different from the flatlands. And so in a way, just to kind of give you a little bit of a picture, think of if you've ever gone to Yosemite and you're in the park, and then if you go to the Nevada side, you descend down the mountain into the plains. Well, this was us driving through the plains and ascending the mountain into what would be the equivalent of a park. And it's heavily forested. It's heavily forested with actual tea trees as well as other plants. But this is a more concentrated tea tree forest than many of the other areas. Hukai itself has some 2 million tea trees that are 200 years old or older. And so, again, it's one of these hidden treasures within this part of Yunnan, southern Yunnan, that most people, most Westerners don't know exists. So the next natural question is, why don't we know it exists? I mean, this sounds like an important place. It is an important place, but let's think about how things become famous in China. If they've been known for a long time by a lot of people, and they're so prominent that almost everybody right away knows, yeah, I know that place, and maybe I've been there, then that's when it gets known here in the West. If they are well known among an industry, but not outside of an industry, then they're unlikely to be known here. And this is important. Looks like I'm hammering a point, but you don't maybe necessarily see the point. The point being, over the years, as tourists in China, tourists from the West have gone to more and more different places, over the years, as more of these places have been discovered to be producing something interesting, word of mouth. And now it's become famous. But it's not in the literature. So when you look in the literature, everybody talks about Yiwu. Everybody talks about Banjiang. Lots of people talk about Bingdao. And these are all names of very famous tea areas in Yunnan. And so everybody has heard of these if they are an aficionado. You talk about Hukai. If you're outside China, you don't know this place. If you're in China and an aficionado, you know this place because lots of people in later years have discovered it and traveled there. So this may lead to another question. Why or how long have they been producing tea? Have these forests just been growing there and nobody's been picking and there's been no production of tea leaves, and so the result is we just don't know about these things? Answer to that would be no. So they've been picking tea since at least the Tang Dynasty. So again, as a reminder, Tang Dynasty started in 618 and went to about 960. So for a long time, over 1,000 years. And locally, it was famous. The tea was thought to be good. The tea is thought and was thought to be unique, but it wasn't enough compared to some of the other places. And one other thing, this is a very important thing as it turns out. Where is this place? Look at that map. It is isolated as heck. It's a long ways away from Beijing. And actually, Beijing was the wrong capital to talk about just then, because during the Tang Dynasty, was Beijing the capital of China? No, it was not. It was Chang'an, or what is today Xi'an. So that was more in the northwest direction. This is a long ways away. And so the result is getting tea from there was not high on any emperor's list, because they're getting tea from the Wui Mountains, they're getting tea from the Yellow Mountains, all these other famous places, and they're loving the tea. who the heck ever heard of Hokkaido? And so that's why you're unaware, because in the long-term histories, there isn't a lot written about this place. And yet, there's this huge population of tea trees. Are there any other reasons? Great question. Is it Han people who make up most of the population, or is it an indigenous peoples that make up most of the population? It's an indigenous peoples called the Lahu, and they tie their culture to tea. And so they have a very distinct, careful, handcrafted way of making tea. And it's relatively homogenous there. It's relatively all Lahu. It's not Lahu and some other indigenous peoples. It's Lahu. And again, their care and cultivation of the plants is different than some of the other indigenous people, certainly different than Han people. So this is one of the reasons that this tea or this area remains relatively unknown. Hard to get to, not in the history books, trying to find a map of where this place is. This morning I get up relatively early. This is going to be easy to find a map. Hokkaido. Who hasn't heard of Hokkaido? And I'm looking, and there's no good map of Hokkaido. It's like, oh my God. But finally, I found this, and we have a good map. So this positions you as to where this tea is from. It's in, again, a good tea growing band. It's around 5,000 feet above sea level. There's lots of different microclimates in this area. When we were there this spring. It was relatively warmer than I expected, but again, they've got lots of fog and rain in the area, so warm a few days doesn't matter, and tea does need some of that warmth. So that gives you the look and feel from the outside of what this place is. So what about when you're out there in the fields? Or in the forest, actually. Is it well manicured or is it growing like a forest? Well, it's half and half, which is also interesting because so many of the forests. So when we talk about the Ilau forest, those are completely unmanicured. Those are completely mixed forests. Banyan trees, magnolia trees, sour cherry trees, all ancient trees. Tea trees, obviously. But it's not been planted. It's not been cultivated. This feels like a much more cultivated area. Although when you walk through the forest, it's also to some degree unmanaged. And so you get the best of both. We're going to taste it in a bit, and so you'll understand why I'm excited about tea from this area, and why both the boss and I have been excited about tea in this area, because once we went there, and once we tasted, it's like, oh, now I see why locally this is famous vis-a-vis all these other tea areas. And you notice from the map, Hokkaido is right next to Banjiang, which is one of the most famous in all of China. And yet the flavor is very different. So these microclimes create different flavor profiles. The varietals create different flavor profiles, and the indigenous peoples who manage the land create different profiles. Yes.
Who within China is aware of and drinking this tea?
Great question. So the question is, all right, here in America, most people don't or heard, they don't know or haven't heard of Hokkaido. Who in China would have heard of Hokkaido? So if you are a lover of raw black, tea, you would have heard of this place because you would know that there are famous tea mountains. And while this one isn't in as many books as, say, Chiang Mai or Nanoa, last week we were in Nanoa Mountain, right? And that's been famous at the imperial court. Hook High is not written much about in the imperial court, so it's not famous from that. So it has to be the aficionados. And of late, so what is of late? Since the year 2000, when there's been a pickup and interest in raw black, Hook High has bit by bit by bit by bit raised or risen in terms of people's regard for how good the tea itself is. So that takes you a little bit in history. That certainly tells you a little bit of the look and feel of it. So let's back away for a brief minute because on your map you do see Nanwal. On your map you see Chiang Mai. On your map you see all these other famous places. So what have the Lahu done so differently than, say, the people in Bingdao? So in Bingdao, I've talked about this a lot because it's one of the sad things that we saw on our tea trip, where the villagers built too close to the tea trees, runoff from the bill, damaged existing tea trees, and the value of Bingdao tea is less than it used to be. And that's because some of the best trees have been damaged or destroyed. In this area in Hook High, there's just been a steady appreciation. Wow. Steady appreciation because the price of this, unlike Banjang, which is right next to it. So you go to Banjang, and at a minimum, you're going to be paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a pound. That's just the price. And everybody, because it's so famous, and by the way, you might be thinking to yourself, well, famous is one thing. Is it worth it? And we've had it. It's never been, by the way, on the board in here, but we have had a secret stash, and it is really good. And we actually got that secret stash for ourselves because in evaluating, we thought, let's put up the other raw blacks because they're really, really good. They're good values. They're delicious. You can learn about raw black. And instead of paying $50 a cup, you can pay, the very reasonable, almost free prices that we have in here per cup and get the pleasure of understanding the raw black. So Hook High is right next to Banja. Do they remotely taste the same? And the answer would be no. They're processed the same way. So let's quickly go through the process because, by the way, we have new club members on today, I believe. Kyle and Lauren, congratulations. And I want to go quickly through the process so you know how this is made. And as a reminder to everybody else, we start out by picking the tea during the spring. And usually in this area, you're going to start picking in March at some point, usually mid-March or so. And you're going to pick a bud and 2 or 3 leaves. And every farmer has their own style. They're generally speaking not going to sell the pick directly. So what do I mean by this? They make the pick, they bring it back to their factories. Do the big production areas from Munhai actually go to those smaller farms? The answer is yes, they do. But do they buy the direct pick? And the answer is for the most part, no. Occasionally they do, but for the most part they don't. When they buy a direct pick, and now I'm getting you into the business detail weeds, and I'll get out of these weeds very quickly. When they do make a direct buy, there are wholesale markets that usually occur in small townships that are close to where tea fields are, or tea cultivation areas are. All right, so they pick, they wither, and usually the withering is outdoors, and the withering can go from 1 day to 2 days to 3 days. And farmers are looking at the weather elements. Is it very damp? Is it foggy? Is it gonna rain? They don't put it out to wither if it's foggy or gonna rain, because the objective is to reduce the moisture in the leaf, right? They wither for whatever time they wither. And by the way, as a reminder to everybody, do they have some old fancy machine which tells them, oh, your withering's finished? The answer would be no. Well, actually, they do have this fancy machine, but we don't usually think of it as such. They have this, the nose. The nose tells them, they smell, hey, this is ready. They feel it also, yeah, this is ready. From the withering, it goes to frying. So this almost sounds like green tea, doesn't it? Except green tea is never withered this long. But it does go from a very brief withering to a frying. But what's the difference in that frying? Are they fried at the exact same temperatures? Nowhere near. The raw blacks are fried much, much cooler than the greens. The greens are fried at 300 or 400 degrees. The objective is to truly denature the entire oxidation enzyme, to kill the green, so to speak. Yes, these sound like martial terms. I'm just using a translation, and that's actually the literal translation. Sha Qing literally means killing the green. I did not make this up. It's too good for me to make up. And what that means, what they mean when they say that, it says kill the green, but really what they mean is destroy the bitterness. Because some of these enzymes cause green tea to be bitter. And so when you drink a green tea that's bitter, something has gone wrong or been shortcutted in the processing. You know, so many people say, oh, God, I can't stand green tea because it's bitter. Well, nobody says that after they drink ours in here. That's the first thing. But yes, on the outside, or if you're in Mordor, yeah, if you pick up some green tea there, it'll be real bitter, or it'll be bitter. And that's because this process of heating the leaves and denaturing the enzyme was incompletely done. Not hot enough. They use a much less hot wok to slightly denature the oxidation enzyme and to reduce bitterness enzymes in the raw black. They cook for a much shorter time, so 8 to 12 minutes. Sometimes a green tea 20 plus minutes. So lower temperature, less time. It's produced, not produced, it's finished. They roll the tea. Some of the green tea is shaped and rolled afterwards, so that can be exactly the same. But they roll it longer and more vigorously with raw black. And then at the conclusion, they sun dry. So that's the process of raw black. So let's remind ourselves again, why are they rolling it? With raw black versus green tea, it's more trying to expose the insides of the everything that's in the tea leaf to get it to the outside. It's not so much the exact aesthetic, whereas with green tea, it's mostly about aesthetic. Then, once it's rolled and you put it outside to sun dry, what are you doing? Are you trying to save electricity? Maybe they're poor up there and they're trying to save electricity. Bad thinking. That's not what they're trying to do. So what they're trying to do, remembering that when they first wither this tea, second step, pick and wither, right? Actually, the organisms from the forest go into homeostasis. By the way, for those of you who are new, I just love 8-letter words or more. So you'll hear me say homeostasis about 9 more times during this broadcast. I just can't get it out of my mouth. But really, homeostasis is talking about they go into hibernation, so to speak. And then when at the last step, they're withered again, or sun-dried, we wouldn't at that point call it withering, but it's the same thing. They sun-dry again at the end. It's to wake those organisms up and get them active. Because remember, the fermentation process, you've got fermentation, which acts on the tea leaves, and then much later in the process, and I'm talking 5 or 6 years later, you start to have an acceleration of oxidation. But you start out with fermentation, and then you move to oxidation. So that's it. And that's called Maocha, Maocha. And I call it the 70% tea, the unfinished tea. And we'll get to that in a minute. The Maocha is what the factory owners will come to the farms to purchase if they're going to take that tea and then make fully fermented tea, ripe or fully cooked pu'er tea. And that's where the factory owners do their investigation. All right, it looks like that my initial investigation with you is coming to an end, and that I'll have to change position. Not have to. I will be very happy to change positions and be right next to great supervision as the boss demonstrates how to brew the tea. So 10-second commercial here. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the very flowery, fully ripened. Oh, wait a minute. I probably should have said that. Wow, that was not very good. The numinous tea master.
Okay.
Bijou.
Okay, so good morning. 早上好. Yeah, so we do wrap like. So I call 生普, in China call 生普. Okay, so that's tea from the Hekai. We do. Just can you help me?
Yeah. So here's the setup. We have a tea tray, 2 glasses, 16-ounce glasses.
Tea kettle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Tea kettle, a strainer, and a tea toy. So all this is, you don't have to have a tea toy, and you don't have to have a tea tray, but they're fun to have. And so the 2 glasses and the strainer are absolutely important. You notice we're not going to cover this, so we have no covers for this. And what the tea master is doing is she's drawing 200-degree water. And you can use any temperature water between 170 and 212 to heat everything up, make sure the glasses are completely clean. Everything is just pristine. Remember, tea absorbs other odors and flavors very easily. So that's why we want to take this extra step to make sure there's nothing there which can influence the final outcome. The most important thing to recognize is that the tea master has a rhythm, and the rhythm dictates paying attention and being present and catching all the steps. Everybody's rhythm is different. My rhythm is different than the tea master's. Your rhythm is different than ours, and that's natural. That's not a problem. However, you establish a rhythm to make sure that you know all the details. And as you're thinking about this, I hope that you have your notes out from Tranquility last week, and from the other raw blacks that we've done, because you can make comparisons, and that's really important. And again, you notice the rhythm. Not in a hurry. Making sure that nothing is missed. Aerating the water, dissipating the steam. She uses 3 cups to speed up the process because she's trying to get the water down to around 170 degrees. Remember, if you're going to err on temperature, err lower than higher. Higher temperature tends to flatten the flavor. Lower temperature tends to bring out the flavor. When you handle the tea, and I use that term loosely because you don't actually handle the tea. You don't put your hand on the tea. You know, she has tools to transfer the tea so that no lotion or other smell that may be on the hand interferes with the tea, with the flavor, with the aroma. What we provided you was 6 grams of the tea. And remember, you're observing. In a minute, you're going to do it. But the first time around, you're observing. Tea Master pours the already aerated water back into the kettle. Why would she do this? She does this so that she could control where the water lands on the cup. You know, she's trying not to pour on the leaves. Now, if you pour directly on the leaves, don't worry about it. These things happen. But if you can get it on the side of the glass, you're going to get the best result. Timer is set for 3 minutes. And what do we see? Well, we see most of the leaves on the bottom, a few on top. Every single tea has a different rhythm in terms of that. And it's always nice to observe because it's consistent. And so for us, we're always taking notes whenever we're in China and observing how these teas are made. And here, that's why I encourage you to take notes, because you'll start to observe patterns. And as you start to observe patterns, you start to make conclusions. Some of the same types of conclusions we make as we go through evaluating these teas. And this is all part of the evaluation process. Now, I finished up at Mao Chao just a minute ago, 70% tea, because this is a critical point, a fork in the road where the farmer decides, okay, I'm done. I'm going to sort it and either press it in a cake or let it be loose leaf, or I'm going to actually fully ferment, or I'm going to sell it to a factory who will do one of those 2 things, most likely fully ferment. So this is a decision point. And a lot has to do with the farmer's storage capacity, has to do with what equipment they have, because if you're going to fully ferment, you need certain equipment for that. And it has to do with what the local custom is, because some of the customs may dictate, for the most part, they want the raw tea. Some say, no, I want the fully fermented, the new methodology for that. Yes.
Are there any fully fermented teas that you've purchased for Sophie's from this location?
No, that's a great question. So the questioner asked, are there any fully fermented Hokai teas? I'm sure there are, but we don't have any. And this area, and you'll see why in a minute when you taste this, because this is extremely drinkable raw black tea. And by custom, for the most part, the Lahu people, when they fully fermented it, they didn't use the brand new, since 1973, that process to ferment it. They used the old-fashioned fermentation process, which was to let it occur naturally over a 30 to 70 year period. So again, I'm sure there, in fact, I know for sure that some of the tea that goes down to the big factories actually does, from Hokai, actually does get, usually gets blended with other tea farms. Timer has gone off. Tea master with rhythm separates the tea leaves from the tea water. And what do we have here? Something beautiful with lots of trichomes in it. Ooh, and a very distinctive aroma. So the first thing we always do is enter the quality arena. Take a small sip. This is a 175-degree sip. So we're careful, but we take a little bit bigger than a 200-degree sip. We coat the tongue. We're looking for where the astringency is. All tea, because of the polyphenols, has astringency in it. It's just genomically for us, it occurs in different, or we detect it in different areas of the tongue or the mouth. Then when we swallow, we're looking for that aftertaste. And lastly, we're looking for energetics the first time around. Energetics, what does that mean? Great question. How you feel the first time around. And sometimes the energetics takes a while to develop. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the quality arena. Okay. And make sure you have your notes out from before, because you're going to find some differences with this one. Now I get astringency, and you're going to tell me where you get yours in a minute. I get an aftertaste. I'm working on the energetics. I take a second sip, and in addition to verifying what I think I first understood, I then look at taste and aroma. Okay, and I take some notes, and it's your turn to brew. So the first thing you do is prepare your water. Set your timer for 3 minutes.
Go to control temperature, low temperature.
Yeah, you again want to err on the side of a lower temperature. We said 175, but if you get it down to
170.
170, thank you. If you get it down even a little bit below that, that's fine. Not in a hurry, just steady. Paying attention to details. Paying attention to details. Really just being present. Yeah.
Yeah.
The tea master reminded me that the raw black in Hokai is by far and away more famous
老班长也是，
than fully fermented.
老班长也是。
And that's the same with Banjiang, Lao Banjiang. It's the raw that really gets people's attention. Yes, tea master, not in a hurry. Steady. Not handling the tea leaves directly. This is in the bag. You get your bag out that's labeled Ardor.
Yeah, and also this called 茶海, 茶针.
So you have a bamboo, we have a bamboo instrument. And you have Chinese names, they're hard to translate. Chahai Si,
Yeah,
it's like the sea container, and you have the needle. But what you see is really a holder of the tea with a bamboo implement to move the tea off the holder.
shaking.
Trying to get the heat distributed among the tea leaves. Pouring the already aerated water back into the kettle so that you can direct the flow of the pour on the side of the cup. Kind of want to pour underneath or get that water underneath. And it's all about getting all the tea leaves evenly watered, so to speak. And yours should look something like this. Lots of leaves at the bottom. It's almost like you got a little sea kelp forest at the bottom. And at the top, you have a few that are hanging up there and slowly dropping downwards. So we have gone through the processing methodology. Generally speaking, especially for higher grade raw black, you want to go through some aging process because it changes over time. It's much more aggressive in the first year, but as each year goes by, that flavor profile changes. And in Hookai's case, it changes in a really good way. So one of the things we haven't talked about yet, and I really wanted to spend time talking about, was some of the issues and what defines Hookai as opposed to other surrounding area farms. So in Hookai, because it's indigenous people, the trees and plants pass down generation by generation, and the generations are relatively stable. You don't have a lot of people leaving the farms and going out into the cities. And so that knowledge is steadily passed down. In other places in Yunnan, you do have a lot of the young people leaving the farms, and therefore you kind of have a break. And as you have a break, certain natural economic trends start to emerge. So what are those trends? One of the trends is that tea trees get sold to outsiders to produce, are actually not sold, but leased to outsiders to produce. You have not only individual outsiders, but also companies that come in and do that. And this is an issue because they make an investment, the outsiders do, and therefore they're not married to the fact that there needs to be a lineage. In other words, that this has lasted for 1,000 years, carefully tended, it'll last another 1,000 years. They're not married to that concept. They're married to the concept of let's produce the most possible now, which leads to overpicking, which leads to damaging the environment. And so this is one of the issues that the local governing bodies of the villages, the local or the provincial governing bodies are starting to think about, because you actually see this in other tea regions as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so you should have separated the tea water from the tea leaves. And what you need to do is start to enter the quality arena. So let's do that. Make sure you take good notes on what you're detecting. And everybody's words are going to be a little different. And again, for those of you who are new, there's probably only a few baseline words that you would never use in description. So I'll help you avoid those accidents. So I'm not inclined to hear the word garlic. I'm not inclined to hear the word liver. So if we can avoid those two taste profiles in describing this tea, then we're probably going to be just fine. Because sometimes you think of certain things as floral that I might call fruity and vice versa, but we're all tasting the same thing. Yes.
Jennifer says the initial, secondary, and follow-up presentation of this tea is umami at its essence. Also sensing strong astringency on the tip and top and back of my tongue. It's also giving me a sense of cooling in my mouth.
All right. So Jennifer kicks us off, cooling in the mouth. And that's not unnatural because the greens and the raw blacks tend to leave you with that cooling. A very strong sense of umami for Jennifer, deep umami, and I sense
Astringency.
yes, tip, top, and back of the tongue. And certainly, this is interesting because I get, let's see, tip, top, and back. Well, I certainly get the tip and top right away. I don't have so much of the back astringency, but that tip and top right away. The cooling feeling, I feel right away. I do detect the umami, but I'm also detecting some other things. So great start. So the other thing while you're thinking about this, that the government is trying to work on, if you have some farmers who overproduce, they also use means which aren't good for the forest overall. So, for example, trying to add fertilizer, trying to use pesticides. So, in some of the less controlled regions, you have this. But Hokai is a very traditional, stable region, and they aren't selling their trees to the outside. Yeah.
Stacy says, I'm getting a roastiness like popcorn in the tea liquor.
Oh, love this comment. So Stacy adds that there's a roastiness in this tea water. And there definitely is a roastiness. And part of that's really interesting because you're catching a varietal difference here. This isn't so much about the pan frying that occurred in this, but this is more about this particular varietal. It's got almost that hint of almost like a yellow tea popcorny, a little bit of that occurring. Great catch on that, Stacy. So that's the other thing, by the way, that we look for when we're going to any tea region and any part of China. Are young people selling off their areas, especially in good producing areas? Are they allowed to do that? In some areas, that's starting to be restricted because the farmers, especially in famous areas, don't want anything which can damage the long-term value. Tea is in a way a little bit like gold. So just like with the gold rush, everybody rushed up there hoping to get big nuggets and turn a fortune overnight. And so there have been times in the 2000s when outsiders have come and said, this is my cue to go and make some purchases, investments, and then become rich overnight. And for a few years, specifically 2005 and 2006, this seemed like a really good idea. And then as the market dynamics and economics as a whole started to change, and as there was an understanding that, you can damage your production by overproducing or not producing correctly or picking until the plant doesn't have the ability to regenerate. So all of these problems started to surface. And so what that did is that knocked out the speculators in 2007, 2008. What happened to the farmers who were slow and steady and who, as they had generations before, farmed in a normal way, especially with the old and ancient trees? In the teens, 2000 teens, all of a sudden, those farmers became fabulously wealthy. So you've got this cycle where outsiders look enviously. Ooh, gosh, their houses are larger than ours. Wow. And they're furnished with things that are worth 10 times more than what we're furnished with. Maybe we should be in the tea business. You know, in a way, it reminds me of a customer, a former customer, who, when he was alive, said, you know what? I'm going to grow, I'm going to buy a tea plant and I'm going to grow the tea and I'm going to end up making scarlet rope and I'll become rich and famous. And the answer is no, you won't. Because in the absence of lineage and in the absence of experience, the years and years of experience of how to make this plant, how to treasure the plant and make it give you or provide it the conditions where it gives you the greatest return. That isn't learned overnight. And it's really something that takes years and years and years of practice to get it right. And this is regardless of whether it's ancient tree or it's that special area in the Wui Mountain, or it's the special areas in the Dragon Well areas. There is no way that any of us, and even the boss and I, we know a few things. We would be incapable of purchasing and producing at the levels, at the top levels that you drink tea here, at the top levels that the farmers produce. And so this is the big difference. And this is that misconception that frequently occurs when people see one segment of the population enriching itself, and it's like, oh, that looks easy. You just climb up a ladder. You have to purchase a ladder. You have to make sure you lean it against the tree and don't fall off of it. Yeah, that seems pretty easy. I ought to be able to do that. Doesn't work that way. All right. We're coming towards the end of this session. Let me tell you a little bit more about Hokai and how it's perceived in the tea world. So the Hokai tea is thought to be extremely drinkable raw black, so mellow. It's also thought to have that hint of sweetness / floral fruitiness underneath. And that's one of the reasons it's so beloved. So that's what Ardor is today. Next week, we're going to coruscation. So coruscation is a relatively newer raw black, Ardor, I think is Ardor, Shirchinian, Hashabanian, are 7, huh? Chinian, okay, 7 years. So this is 7 years old. Coruscation is a little bit younger than that. So your responsibilities this week are to stay healthy, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye now.
Take care.